Welcome back to All About Love, the dating, healing and attachment podcast. Caitlin?
Yes?
Blending into the chair today, as you just said. If you're on YouTube, you can see.
I know I've got like the most comfortable jumper on ever, but it does match the chair. I feel like I'm in like a very like relaxed vibe today.
Yeah.
Feeling quite zen, feeling quite chilled, which is actually a great time to talk about our topic.
Yes.
As guys, we got so excited and inspired from the feedback that we had around the attachment styles episode that we are going to do a whole episode on how to self-soothe when an abandonment wound is triggered, because we had a lot of comments around because obviously we talked about abandonment wound and we talked about kind of a little bit about how to get into regulation, self-soothing and things like that. So today we really want to talk to you about what is an abandonment wound and what it looks like. And then please stay tuned for the 6 tips of what you can practically do when your insecurity is triggered. So when your anxiety is triggered or when you want to withdraw, what you can start to do instead. So Carly...
Sorry, just stared at you. Sorry. Should we go in and what is an abandonment wound and what is self-soothing?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good place to start. So abandonment wound is that wound, that fear of being left, being, as it sounds, abandoned, being rejected. It is something within you that just fears that someone is going to leave you behind.
And for me, it's important to note that that abandonment wound is rooted in the past, whether it's, you know, let's say predominantly childhood or other kind of formative experiences or even romantic relationships. And when it gets triggered, you're kind of frozen in time. I like to think about it. So you go back to the feeling of then, you go back to the pain of then, and you sometimes can really struggle to get out of that. But I also think when we have abandonment wounds, it manifests quite a lot in current relationships. So we might be worried, we might be afraid of conflict or rejection or being unwanted. So as a result of that, you know, we could people please, we could self-abandon, we might struggle to set boundaries, we might rush the process, chase unavailable people, like, you know, or kind of go into more of the overcompensation, so the over-texting, the having to secure the relationship, the rushing the process. Again, it goes back to like whatever you need to do to try and feel secure so they don't leave.
Yeah,
we
and
will naturally do.
This doesn't apply to this, whatever your relationship status, right? And something that I feel is like coming up and is really important just to note is that none of us want to be abandoned, and naturally as humans we do fear being left, we do fear being rejected. That's really natural. But what we want to talk about today is perhaps when you're someone who struggles to come back to yourself after that fear. So, you know, let's say if you're dating and someone cancels a date or you feel someone pulling back. On the one hand, we're all going to notice that. We can all feel disappointed. We can all feel fearful about what this means, about this situation. But some of us are going to struggle to bring ourselves back to a state where we can think a little bit clearer, where we can move on with our day, function at work, you know, just get on with things. And some of us will fully lose ourselves over that fear of possibly being abandoned.
Oh my God, waiting for the text back.
Yeah.
That's
and there's that level, isn't
one.
it? It's the severity where it's natural to wait for that text back, but how dysregulated do you become? And I think that's the question is, and you know, that's something for you to ask yourself is, do you feel that you get dysregulated to a normal amount? Or does it feel excessive?
And I agree. And I think I said this in the attachment episode, but it's really interesting looking at abandonment wounds, especially when dating, because when you're in that relationship, yes, you can be triggered massively, but you usually have the security of them coming back, or you've got a past evidence that they're going to be there, right? But whereas dating, it becomes this whole horrible area of uncertainty, and we can't cope with that natural uncertainty that comes with dating because we are on hyper alert to being left. So I think if you are dating at the moment, we've got you, we feel you. And even if you're not, start practicing the tips, I think, that we can give you. So when you do get triggered, it becomes a hell of a lot easier, guys, to actually be able to regulate yourself.
Yeah, because I think that's a really good point, isn't it? Like, if we were to pinpoint some typical times that people might feel their abandonment wound flare up, maybe it is when something's come to an end, breakups, your partner going away, your partner choosing something else over you in this moment or this weekend, your date cancelling, your date not texting as frequently, whatever it is, as soon as you fear the ending.
And let's be honest, when you're in this state, please remember, as Carly just said, you're driven by fear. So it's a fear response, right? Whatever you do after is a coping mechanism. And we need to have so much compassion for ourselves in that moment, because you're scared. You're at the bottom line, you're frightened of what's to come. You're frightened of being unseen or not good enough or unimportant. Like, there is a little part of you that is scared, and we need to look after that little part.
Yeah. And as always, tell us, like, briefly, if we're able to do briefly, tell us briefly about your experience of fearing abandonment or being left.
My abandonment issues came out in the people I was choosing. So I was always chasing unavailable men. And that's because there was actually no real chance of it turning into anything.
They couldn't abandon you?
No, they couldn't abandon me because they were never mine in the first place. But the feeling was the same. So you were always being disappointed. You were always kind of being left but not left. There was never actually any real, like, fear of having to be myself, of having to be seen. And for me, it was a lot scarier to date somebody who I did like, who liked me and who saw me for what I was. That vulnerability was so much more frightening, because then there literally was the possibility, hang on, this person could see who you are, see the real you, and reject you.
Yeah.
And leave.
Yeah.
So that was that was my experience of it, I'd say, that constant chasing. And of course, like, you know, you wouldn't want to rock the boat, wouldn't speak up because they didn't want to, you know, put anybody off, or, you know, you'd start to kind of mold yourself a little bit, wouldn't you, to be what they wanted and things like that. And, you know, ignoring the red flags.
I can relate to most. Well, I would say I can relate to 90% of that I can relate to. And I guess, like, another difference, or maybe you can relate to it as well, is probably just that quick jumping to conclusions that I can have, that this is going to mean the end, or this person is leaving, and whatever that can look like. Usually that's what I would be expecting that somehow relationships don't last.
Yeah, there's something in it, isn't it, of, like, always expecting the worst.
Yeah.
This is what I hear a lot from clients as well. They rarely meet people they like. So when they do, that obsession takes over, but you're constantly in that state of waiting for the shoe to drop.
Yeah.
So you're waiting for them to go, you're waiting for it to end.
Even when it's good.
When it's good, yeah.
Exactly.
And that's why we want to rush forward and try and, like, secure the relationship.
Yeah. Just don't abandon me.
Yeah. But that all stems, guys, from that fear of being left or rejected or whatever. Our fear of, this question for you, fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, the same.
Potato.
Yeah, I mean, because they're always talking about the different wounds, aren't they?
Yeah.
But I always think they're quite similar.
I think they're quite similar. It's just probably, I don't know, let's think of rejection, probably easier to relate to work or something. But ultimately, you just look inwards and see what are your reactions. And even these self-soothing skills here that we're about to talk about, they're going to apply to so many areas of our lives. So in terms of self-soothing, what is it?
So for me, when we think about when we've been triggered by, like, an abandonment wound, our body, our nervous system gets stuck in a state of flight, fight or freeze. And we might not have had the experience or learned the experience, have been taught of how to get ourselves out of that and make ourselves feel safe and okay. So for me, self-soothing and regulation is basically, what can you do to feel okay in that moment, and use, say, slightly more healthy tools to take responsibility for that feeling and literally soothe yourself. I, like, in my head then was just like kind of stroking my little shoulders, like giving yourself a hug. Like, it's that calm down, you're going to be okay. So it's the tools of what we can learn to do, because we haven't all been taught how to do that. Usually what you would hope is you're taught as a child how to soothe yourself through other people and through yourself. But if you haven't had that experience, or let's say you did have that, but you had an abusive relationship, you had very toxic patterns or whatever, that can kind of be chipped away. So you've got to relearn.
It's like to calm down.
Yeah.
Like teaching yourself to calm down. And of course, in this episode, it's self-soothing. So we're talking about how to calm ourselves down.
We will automatically try and look for somebody else to calm us down, to self-soothe us, rather than creating that safety within ourselves.
Especially if you're someone that's anxious.
Yes, definitely. But the issue is, and the kicker is, chances are your romantic partner might not be able to give you everything you need in that moment. So that's why it's so important to look within and to build these tools, because they're going to go away at some point.
Yeah.
They're going to be out of the house.
You're going to be rejected at some point.
Yeah.
They're going to say no. Someone is going to ghost you if you're dating.
Yep.
And do you know what I always say is the amount... So if we're talking about if you are someone who feels like you struggle to self-soothe, especially because you feel like you need someone else to text back or to calm you down or to give you that love to meet that need, I always say the amount that you feel like you need someone else is usually the amount that you need yourself. Like you need yourself in that moment. Of course, when we were younger and as children, we needed an adult. That's absolutely true. As an adult, it's not so true. We do need people, obviously, but not in the same way. And there are times where there is no one else around. There are times, maybe it's 3 o'clock in the morning, maybe it's a Sunday afternoon, whatever it is, there's times where there's no one else around and we have ourselves.
Yeah. Which nicely brings us on to the tips for self-soothing when triggered.
Yeah.
So I would just caveat this with doing this work, as you guys know, is not a quick fix. It is a process of like finding who we are, of kind of looking at authenticity and of coming home to ourselves. And whilst we're doing this work, it doesn't mean that we're never going to be triggered. Okay, you don't get to a point where you're so healed, or whatever you want to call it, that nobody ever pisses you off or you never get activated. So actually it can be really interesting to look at when we are triggered as a kind of source of like knowledge and understanding our patterns and seeing what we need on the inside, seeing what kind of where we do need a bit more love or attention and what is going on internally.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like, I feel like you can really see things are changing when you can go inwards first.
Yeah. Okay, so what's your number one?
Number one, I'm sure if you're listening to this episode, it's possible you've already Googled self-soothing, you've already listened to some things perhaps, and you're going to come across a very familiar tip across the board, which is awareness, to acknowledge that you're in this state. I feel like it's really, really important that when you're activated, when you're triggered, that you can sense and acknowledge, I am currently triggered, or something in me is activated right now. That itself, that slight acknowledgement, is actually a bit of presence. I think it's Eckhart Tolle. He says, like, even if you're in it, you're super stressed, lost yourself, gone somewhere else, if you have a moment of saying, okay, I listened to Caitlin and Carly's podcast, what is it that they said? That's a moment of presence. That was a moment of coming out of it. If you're a ruminator and you have a moment of thinking, I know I'm ruminating, but I can't get out of it, that is a moment of presence, and that really counts. So even if you think I can't do it in the moment, if you can just acknowledge, I'm in it, this is happening, this is exactly what I've been working on, and if you pop back into it and then you come back out and keep having this conversation, that moment of acknowledgement is so powerful, and we just can't undervalue it.
Would you say that's the same? Do you have to go into like being able to name what you feel? Do you have to go into doing that, or is it just simply acknowledging that you feel triggered about something, even if you're not sure what it is.
Yeah, this is going to depend, isn't it, on where you are right now. So in an ideal state, we're then going to shift in being like what I feel and where I feel it and what is it that's being triggered. But ultimately, even to get there, to be able to acknowledge what is the feeling, we have to first say, like, this is it, I'm in it. And the sooner we can acknowledge that this is the triggered state, whatever sign it is we've had, like my face goes really numb, like whatever the sign is, if you can acknowledge that you're in it, the sooner the better. The sooner you acknowledge, the less chance you have of spiralling.
So interesting, isn't it? Because I used to really piss me off when you'd be like, just sit with how you're feeling, because I would be like, okay, but what's the fix? What's the doing? What do I do?
Yes.
How do I get out of it? But actually, you're right, it's the acknowledgement and the trigger, and then if you can name emotions or see what's going on in your body, not to have to do anything, just to have that awareness.
Yeah, do you know how powerful it is when we just say, this is my abandonment wound? Like, this is happening because I'm triggered right now. I think that is so incredibly powerful. It can mean like that thought of like, whatever the thought is that you're having, it can just give you a little bit of power over that.
And also, not making it about the other person.
Exactly.
It takes the power away from them, doesn't it? About, especially if you're dating, you know, it's not about the weirdo that you've like been on one date with, the fact that they haven't texted you. It's not about them. Stop giving them that power.
Yeah, I think it's really powerful, like in that moment, even if that this is where it starts to go to new levels, isn't it? But once you have that acknowledgement, over time you're going to know what your acknowledgement looks like and what it sounds like. And I remember I used to say like something along the lines of, I am stronger than this wound.